Okay. Everybody ready to go? Let's get going then. All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Today is the January 9th, 2013 regular meeting of the Port of West Sacramento. So please stand and join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, there was no closed session today. We'll start within our item number 1, presentation by members of the public on matters not otherwise on the agenda. I've got several cards here. It looks like they're all for number 3. But is there anyone here that wishes to address us on an item not otherwise on the agenda? All right. Seeing no requests to speak, we'll go on to item 2, our consent agenda, which is item 2, approval of the minutes from December 12th. Is there a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Hearing no abstention or negative vote, it's unanimous. We'll now go to item number 3. This is our regular agenda. Tonight we are going to be talking some more and considering our port business plan. This is a workshop on potential port operating models. And with that, we're going to, yes, sir, Marty.
Thank you,
Tuttle, sorry.
Chairman and Commissioners. This is the third of 4 workshops on the Port Strategic Plan. We've broken up where we've provided you an overview of the finances for the port, a separate workshop on the cargo analysis and revenue. Tonight we focus on the real estate holdings of the port and then an introduction of potential alternative operating models for the port. Once this is completed today, we have a community forum on the 22nd that begins at 5 o'clock across the street. There is a flyer on the community forum that should be at your desk where we will gather additional public input over a longer period of time rather than the short commission meeting, but provide an opportunity for folks to look at all segments of the business plan and provide input at that time, where we report back the following day at the commission meeting on the 23rd about that community input. So we are moving through a fairly deliberate timeline here. We're on schedule. We have an opportunity to come back to the City Council at their retreat from the perspective of city contributions to the port, get that information, and then come back to you in February, on February 20th, with a proposed business plan and a list of implementations. So measures. So tonight we focus again on the real estate holdings. Charlene Hamilton will make that presentation, but in terms of operating models, that will be done by Aaron, and Aaron is going to provide just sort of a short overview of tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Marty, and good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. Just a quick outline of the presentation. Marty already kind of covered it, but we're going to start with just an overview of the port's real estate assets. Then Charlene's going to take over and talk about the Seaway development analysis, and then it'll turn back to me, and we'll talk about potential operating models and next steps. I just want to point out we do have a consultant that has been helping us in evaluating the operating models, and he is here tonight in case there are detailed questions or questions that you'd like from the consultant to answer. But he does have to leave at 6:20, so we're hoping to complete the presentation and then end with questions at that point. So moving right into the real estate discussion, and this reflects the information provided in the staff report, so it's going to go in the same sort of order. Just first, an overview of the port's real estate holdings in the North Terminal. It's a mix of cargo facilities, properties that are currently leased to private entities, development sites, and these are vacant potential development sites, and then one privately owned property, which is the Sierra Northern Railway portion that the port sold last year. I'm going to start with an overview of the cargo facilities, and this relates also to the later discussion about operating models when we talk about the individual facilities. First, you have your main cargo area, which is the area that is currently producing cargo revenue at the port from bag rice and project cargo. Next would be the bulk rice facility, as you can see in the southeastern corner of the port. Then you have the bulk grain facility, which includes the silos, and the bulk cargo facility, which we also refer to sometimes as the back area. And that's the large area that includes the warehouses, the conveyor system, the domes, and the processing area for bulk cargo. The properties that are leased currently at the port are the ones you see in the red. I'll point out each one a little bit of information on Two Rivers, Cal Agri, and Manson Construction. The difference between those and the other revenue is on West Coast Recycling, we have a signed lease. The leasee is not current right now, but it is a signed lease. We have license revenue of about $65,000 from wireless providers and pipelines that run through the port. And then the rail yard and the rail facilities throughout the city that the port owns generate about $132,000. So you can see those are the main income sources of real estate revenue at the North Terminal. North Terminal development sites include the property that was planned for the Primafil facility. Those are the 11 acres along Industrial Boulevard on 2 sites there. And then at the western end, you have a 7-acre area that right now is also used for project cargo storage, but it could be a potential development site. There's a smaller, about 3-acre site just south of that. And then we have the West Coast Recycling site on there because it really is a development project that has a lease, but it's dependent on development. Then we move away from the North Terminal and getting to and looking at the port strictly from a financial analysis of the real estate assets. You would call these your most productive assets. These are the ones that Cemex and Agrium are pretty much straight lease payments, or in Cemex's case, a MAG. Very little operating costs associated with those because they're just managing real estate deals. And the rail yard, the rail facilities generate revenue for the port, but that's done at a very minimal operating expense. Then you get into Seaway, and as I mentioned, we'll have a longer discussion about Seaway in a minute from Charlene, but just note that we have about 260, anywhere from 230 to 260 developable acreage in Seaway, and Charlene will go into the land use designations and some of the constraints and opportunities on Seaway. And then there's another site I just want to point out that is owned by the city, but it's a 22-acre site just to the west of Seaway. And the point on that one is that as we're thinking about how to position Seaway for development and how to take the right steps to capitalize on that asset, it makes sense to also put it in the context of the city's property as well and the relationship it has between Seaway and the Southport Industrial Park development. Then the port has what we call the channel and delta lands, including the Deepwater Ship Channel itself. It's about 40 miles long, and it has about 2,000 acres of dry land on either side of the channel. The other 2 assets that are in the delta would be Prospect Island. We own about 300 acres of the island, and Decker Island, we own about 130 acres. And the real estate tie to these is not just what their original purpose was intended for, which was channel maintenance and channel deepening for dredge spoils, but thinking ahead more, repositioning those properties for habitat mitigation is an opportunity that we should be exploring, and we'll be recommending that we do that through the business plan to see what the potential value of habitat mitigation could be for those properties, provided that the channel deepening project isn't moving forward. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Charlene, and we're going to go into further analysis of the Seaway property before it comes back to me for the operating models. Thanks.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. So this exhibit that is up on the slide is one of the pages of the tentative map that was processed back in 1995. And there were various entitlements that the Port District processed with the city in 95 and 96, the vesting tentative map being one of them, plan development standards, a development agreement, and a financing agreement. The vesting tentative map and plan development standards and a financing agreement are still in effect. But upon further review, of the Subdivision Map Act, the extension that was noted in the staff report for the vesting tentative map appears not to be applicable. However, we did find 2 other extensions that were granted by the governor and the state legislature, respectively, that appear to be valid, and thus the expiration of the vesting tentative map is going to revise to June 10th, 2015. So that actually gets us two two-year extensions. The Seaway Development Agreement had a term of 15 years, beginning in 1996, and that expired on June 5th, 2011. As our research has uncovered that an extension request was brought before the City Council in and around, I think the first discussion started in 2001, and it was brought before formally in 2003. But it was continued to a date uncertain according to the city clerk's records. And searching city clerk's files and port files, we cannot find where that ever returned to the City Council for formal consideration or whether that there was any approvals issued for an extension. So we consider it expired at this point. Given that the majority of the terms in the development agreement upon our review over the last month and a half appear to be contained in either the vesting tentative map, the conditions for that, mitigation measures in the environmental document, the Plan Development 37 standards which are in place, and the financing agreement terms. We haven't been able to really identify any significant impacts one way or the other to the city or the port. However, we're still reviewing this, and it will be something that we'll bring back with the business plan in the future. The
Clarifying question?
Sure, of course, yes.
Sure.
Clarifying.
Feel free.
You said 2015 for the vesting tentative
Yes.
subdivision map? And one of the former planning commissioners on the council may know this better, but so the staff report says it's still valid, has an expiration date of June 10th, 2014. Is that?
The 3-year extension that we thought applied, the Subdivision Map Act is about as easy to understand as the National Electric Code. We thought that the 3-year extension with a final map filing applied, but in reviewing the latest Subdivision Map Act, it looks as though that can't apply since a development agreement is what extended the tentative map to a 15-year term. But there were other extensions that the governor and the state legislature granted, and it appears the tentative map qualifies for those extensions. The governor granted one, 2-year one, for maps that would expire prior to 2011, or after 2011. And then there was another one that the state legislature granted an additional 2 years beyond that. So it went from a 3-year extension that we thought it qualified for to an accumulation of a 4-year.
So the difference is just we've learned more since the printing of the staff
Yes,
report. Okay, gotcha.
yes,
Thanks.
we've learned more. So moving on to the current land use designations according to the general plan.
Excuse me, though, I apologize. So can you just sort of give us, just for the sake of those who don't understand all this stuff like me, so what does that mean then, what you just told us to the port? Why is it important for us to know this?
It's important to know what entitlements you have in place. These entitlements have value for the land, not only just from a sales perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. As we move forward and try to position it for development, the fact that we've had some environmental clearances, or we know what our environmental mitigations are going to be, is very helpful.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So under the city's current general plan, Seaway has the following land uses, and they're showing up on the slide. The majority of it is water-related industrial, and that lies on the north side of Southport Parkway and south of the Barge Canal, and that's about 174 acres. And at the targeted build-out that's identified in the EIR, that would equate to about 1,894,860 square feet of building area that might be possible on that zone in Seaway. And then there are 70 acres of business park And again, at the build-out that was contemplated under the EIR, that's a little under 1 million square feet of building area that could be constructed. Light industrial, about 11 acres. That's business park and light industrial are on the south side of Southport Parkway. About 168,000 square feet of building there. Then there's a small area of neighborhood commercial that's down in the southwest quadrant of Seaway, and that's primarily to serve the businesses that would be constructed in Seaway and potentially in the nearby Southport Industrial Park. And that's about, at a 25% floor area, that'd be about 65,000 square feet. So the total developable acreage there is showing about 260, 261. In the staff report, we indicated a low of a potentially about 230. That's because there could be some additional habitat setbacks from the remnant Lake Washington that could affect the water-related industrial and the business park land uses. So that's why there's a range contained in the staff report of the potential developable acreage. And then other uses, open space, 55 acres, that's predominantly the remnant Lake Washington. Recreation and parks, there's an area currently set aside for parks that's connected to the open space. And then roadways, both the existing roadways and roadways yet to be built that were contemplated by the vesting tentative map equate to about 12 acres. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of development potential in Seaway. However, there's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place to really place it competitively in the market. And so I'm going to go back a slide.
Yes. Charlene, can I just ask, so the 1.8 million square foot of water-related industrial, so is that to assume that whatever would get built there would have obviously some relationship to shipping or moving goods in and out of the port, right? Or is that, I mean, has that been defined, or what do you interpret that to be?
That is equal to a heavy industrial, an M3. Under Plan Development 37, the water-related industrial was contemplated to have some relationship to the port and support that. There is the potential for docks, possibly, on the south side of the barge canal. It was an area that had some permitted uses that were allowed within Plan Development 37 that differ a little bit from the city's typical heavy industrial zone. And it was items more related to the bulk type products that you would see at the port. And it also contemplated.
Can I follow up on that though? So you said the word, it contemplated water, essentially water-oriented industrial development, and it had the potential, but does it require that the industrial uses that are on those acres have a relationship to the water, to shipping, or to the port, that zone?
There's no requirement that it has to have that. It just made it possible for it to have that relationship more so than just the standard M3 zone.
Gotcha.
And rail is also part of it. You'll see that on the tentative map. But through the process in 2005, when we were looking at the master development potential of Seaway, at the time there was a big push on residential. There was some analysis done by Parsons Brinkerhoff that indicated that a rail extension across the barge canal and into the water-related industrial may or may not be feasible. And some of that has to do with the needs, the design requirements for rail, especially the radius. So, well, let me back up here to this. So the tentative map, you can see, I don't know if the arrow will show up here. Here's the rail that was sort of contemplated, the alignment. And it's really this radius, this connection, this radius, that there's still a question about the feasibility of that. So that's something that, as we look further at Seaway and its development potential, we're going to take another look at that. So roadways, I'd like to move into kind of the infrastructure discussion and what's built and what's still needed. So roadways, on the tentative map, this shows the roadways that either have been constructed and or are contemplated. And for the most part, the roadway, this here is actually named Lake Washington Boulevard, and is constructed, but not to the full extent. It still needs a lane on the Seaway side, 1 lane each side. So it was contemplated at 6 lanes. And then Southport Parkway, northwest, same thing, 4 lanes of the contemplated 6 lanes, and the median has been installed. So there's still a lane on each side of the roadway that needs to be constructed. And then all the interior roadways in here have not been constructed. It's also anticipated that all the intersections, and there's 4 that are contemplated on, where's my arrow? There we go. 1 here, 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 and here. They're contemplated to be signalized, and none of those signals are in, as well as there's still street lighting that remains outstanding. So city engineering staff took a look at these outstanding improvements and what our typical costs are. And so we have an estimate of about $13,592,708 is what it would take to finish off construction of all the roadways as contemplated by the tentative map. So if there's no questions on that, I'll move on to water.
So you say contemplated, but I mean, the vesting center, I mean, all the entitlements are dependent on these improvements. I mean, it's required. This is not an aspirational set of improvements. Well, I mean, we either get the entitlements plus these improvements, or we don't get either one, right?
Well, vesting tenant, I say contemplated because later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about that we're going to recommend looking at these alignments, these improvements to see whether or not there's some value engineering that can be done, whether these roadways and these parcel sizes still make sense looking forward, and whether or not there's a need for, if Seaway could be made more valuable by maybe modifying the tentative map. Yeah, but everything I'm talking about now, yes. This is what was approved on the tentative map.
Okay, but the port as a development, I mean, all of that would require the city's review and concurrence from the perspective of what's in the best interest of the city. The port as a developing entity has to, I mean, the requirements are these. As they are now, we could make a proposal for changes, but we don't have the ability to make those changes directly as part of any sale or any other transaction.
Correct. Very good point. Thank you, Mayor.
And I think that's just a definition, because I'm trying to put my planning commission hat back on, but what the tentative map actually represents as a document, because this is the peculiar situation where actually this is our tentative map, and the process is we would go back to the city to get it changed or modified based on what has been proposed 10 years ago, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to get clear in my head, wrap my brain around that for a second. So this is not, while it's what's in place, the point you're going to make is we can make modifications and basically apply back to the city for these changes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But, I mean, part of the reason I raise it is that if we, since I do happen to serve on the city council simultaneously, when a private developer comes back and says, I have an approved map and other agreements, what have you, and I'd like to make these changes, then we at the city say, well, over that period of time that you're saying the standards have changed and we should make some, value engineering and all that, our impact fees have also changed and other things have changed on our side of the equation as well. And so that's a back and forth negotiated settlement. It's rare that a private developer comes forward and says, I want to make all these changes to reflect changes from when it was approved 15 years ago, and the city just says, okay, fine, without regard to the city's financial implications of that change too. So it's, I mean, because we happen to serve on the same bodies, I think we'd get a fair hearing, but I think we need to be clear with ourselves in this capacity that that's not a foregone conclusion, and it would be a negotiated arrangement between the two, between us as a developer and the city government, between us and you.
Correct, yeah, it would require an application to the city. There would be a cost to that. It could require, any proposed modifications could require additional environmental review. It could affect the vesting status. It could roll into the financing agreement. When you open up entitlements for modification, it kind of puts it all back on the table again. So there is some risk in that.
Well, maybe another way for me to understand that is that 2015 date you gave us. If I were Danny Remus Development and I wanted to just buy it as is and build it as is, I wouldn't need to do anything else with the port or the city. I'd have certain rights vested and in place should I want to change virtually any of those. Certainly after the 2015 date, then pretty much everything's back on the table, I assume.
Yeah, that date could be fairly significant.
Right.
There are quite a few things that we'll get into that need to be completed, such as a final map and possibly a subdivision improvement agreement, in order to keep those entitlements going. It's unlikely that Seaway will build out within 3 years. Right. It would be great, but in this market, that might be a little optimistic. So.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to water now. So this slide shows the water distribution system that was approved on the tentative map. And the portion that is highlighted in yellow is what has been constructed to date. And that is the water transmission main. All other public water lines in the streets still need to be constructed. And we've estimated that to be about $1.5 million to complete the water system as approved by the tentative map. Sewer, very little of the sewer system has been constructed to date. Only the highlighted yellow portion down in the very southeast corner was constructed, and that serves the West Ridge Plaza, which was essentially the Phase 1 development of Seaway. And so the remaining sewer improvements approved by the tentative map, those outstanding would cost about $928,000.
Yes, Mark. Question.
Charlie, just this thing.
Yeah.
Just because now we're connected to the regional system, this was before that, wasn't it? In terms of the sewer requirements, I guess the point is whether or not there's any additional requirements we have for industrial wastewater going into the regional system.
It's my understanding, yes, this was approved prior to the Lower Northwest Interceptor Agreement, but it's my understanding that that agreement contemplated the Seaway entitlements and distribution system. And it's actually covered in the financing agreement. Moving on to drainage, the drainage is got a fair amount to it, and it's probably one of the more costly undergrounds that we have to do. It is the more costly. So what's highlighted in yellow has been constructed to date. The first phase, West Ridge Plaza, that drainage was allowed to flow into unused capacities of the main drain, and it's possible that, well, let me back up here. So that first phase did an engineering study and was found that the main drain could accommodate it. So they didn't have to get into the Lake Washington expansion that's required for the drainage system that was approved with the tentative map. The remainder of Seaway, any further development would have to get into the expansion of the remnant Lake Washington. And that has environmental and permitting issues that still need to take place, because we're getting into a stream bed alteration permit and permits that would be needed with the Corps of Engineers. So the amount of improvements that are outstanding under the approved drainage plan is about $8.5 million. And there's some timing with that. As you know, some of our other experiences in getting into those types of permits, those can take a year or two to get through the permitting process at the state and federal level.
Is this a Regional Water Quality Board issued permit?
They might, yeah, yes. And so, we have in the staff report that this is something we might want to look at. The Port Commission might want to look at, are there other drainage solutions? And maybe that's a modification you want to consider to the tentative map. The city, in our experience, there's some new products out, there's some new solutions out for drainage. And so maybe there's a way that can be further value engineered, may require a tentative map modification to change the drainage plan, but it might be something worthwhile given the permitting requirements. So the total cost that we've estimated to complete the improvements approved under the tentative map, including about 25% soft costs. So that's some additional engineering analysis, that's permitting for getting into Lake Washington for the drainage solution, that's design of all those systems, engineering design. We've estimated about 25%. We've tried to be a little bit conservative, and then an additional 15% contingency, which is fairly standard on these large projects. So we have a total of about $34 million.
Keep going.
Keep going, okay. All right.
Say something better now.
You want to sink in? That would sink in?
Okay, I'm kind of going to close all this up. So before I get into this next slide, there's one other agreement that has some influence on Seaway, and that is the Joint Port Governance Agreement. There are a few terms in there regarding any sale or lease of Seaway lands that the port you'll need to address within the next 3 years. So there's noticing and approval requirements for the city and county of Sacramento if there's any sale or lease of property that is below market rate value. So we'll just want to keep that in mind. If there are any sales or sale proceeds of Seaway that total over $50 million, then there needs to be a distribution into the Riverfront Enhancement Fund. Given the current market conditions, we don't foresee that coming up quickly.
Is that a net proceed? Is that account for the 34 million? Would the 34 million count against that 50 or no?
The 34 million would be taken into consideration. I mean, we'd have to get credit for that type of investment. And so that's why we don't see that coming up, but we wanted to alert to you. It is a term in there. The one that's the most significant that we need to pay attention to is a requirement that all Seaway property be disposed of by January 15th, 2016. So that was 10 years from the date of the governance agreement. However, there is a provision in there for an extension in writing by all parties, provided for that it's executed before the deadline. So, and I don't think they would withhold that, because trying to force a sale in this market wouldn't be in the best interest of all the prior governing bodies. So, but we'll just want to keep track of that date and make sure we don't miss it. So the next steps, wrapping up, the next steps, and this is what you're going to see coming into the business plan at the next few meetings. Staff is going to be recommending that we review, we ask the city to kind of take a look at the general plan update and the land use designations. The last preferred land use scenario that was before the city council was showing some changes to the designations I had spoke to earlier. Not significant in a way that is changing it from industrial to residential, but more along the lines as it was allowing more flex, still staying in the industrial employment center designations. And so we'll take a look again at those when that comes before the city council this year. We'll be analyzing comparable sales of entitled but unimproved business park and industrial properties so that we can provide you with a current value range for the developable property. And then also comparing that to a projected value if you invest the $34 million. So we kind of want to give you what it would value at in the current market without the $34 million investment, and then what would be the value with the $34 million investment. We'll be reviewing the development phasing and infrastructure, or we'll be recommending a review of the development phasing and the infrastructure to see if there's any economic or engineering efficiencies that can be achieved. And then also, you're likely to see a recommendation on infrastructure financing options for the property, including the potential for tax increment financing, such as an infrastructure financing district. And then I already talked about the governance issues. And then also, we'll be recommending exploring a joint venture between the port, the city, and a master developer. So that concludes my portion, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Any other questions?
So, is there, why not just try to get the governance agreement wiped off the books altogether? I mean, there's no, I mean, the reason for it was the negotiations when we took responsibility for the governance of the port, and the suspicion by folks on the governing bodies of the Sacramento City Council and the Board of Supervisors over there who weren't on the Port Commission, who thought that, you know, there must be some gigantic property bonanza over here just waiting to be had, and they were worried that the moment we took control, we would sell all the property for $1 billion, and so we had to have this agreement to make sure that that didn't occur. And we're not in that situation. There is no scenario under which there is any upside to them anytime ever. And we need, I mean, frankly, given all the, I mean, this is just one, this is the, in some ways, the least important piece of all the stuff that we've got to get through with the port, but we need the maximum number of degrees of freedom. And so I think it's worth at least exploring, not just extending the 2016 date, but wiping that out altogether. So we don't have to deal with that component of it any longer. It's not helpful, and it's not ever going to produce. If it really is net at $50 million, it's never going to produce anything for them. The reason that it's there is no longer necessary. And the amount of money that the city has put into the port is far over what any of them had anticipated, or that we anticipated, frankly, when the governance agreement was executed. And so I think there's a good reason for us to at least open that conversation, potentially with the City of Sacramento and the County of Sacramento, and of course Yolo County as well.
Good idea. Yes. Mark?
Yeah, maybe just to follow up on that, is there any liability to the members under the current governance agreement in terms of residual liability that we might be able to use to trade off with maybe eliminating that agreement at this point?
Are you
Exposure.
saying, are you questioning liability of individuals or liability of the members who make up
The
that?
members, yeah, the parties to that agreement.
No, I don't think so. If there's a negotiated termination of the agreement, part of that would be a release of any
I mean, as the
responsibility.
agreement now stands, is there any exposure to any of the parties to the agreement at all?
For failure
Liability,
to.
I mean, if, for example, the agreement continues, do any of the parties to the agreement have any exposure to any liability at all? Any payment obligation or making good on any debts or anything like that? I don't have a copy of the
You know,
agreement.
I haven't looked at it that closely recently. I don't believe so. There's the obligation, as Charlene indicated, to put the property on the market and to complete a transaction. I don't recall there being any payment called out, like some minimum amount of money that had to be generated by a sale.
Yeah, there's only a notice requirement if a sale or lease comes in at below market value.
But that'll be part of what
Yeah,
we'll
we
look at.
can take a greater look at that.
Thanks.
I think it's one good reason to do the master developer RFA or something like that to test the private market more fully. I mean, I think the staff has done a very good job of inventorying or analyzing and forecasting all that can be done as a development project, and it's really useful. But I think that part of the question is, could you value engineer? Could you revise some of these things? Could you look at flex and all of that, and then compare that? Is that worth giving up the vesting tentative subdivision map and all of that? And you can do that analysis to a point, but we're not going to be the ones doing that. I mean, the port doesn't have $34 million itself to make those improvements, so it's not really going to be our call unless, as you say, we have a joint venture with not just the city but with a private partner, and the only way to see if that's possible is to start testing. I mean, I'm saying all this in the context of assuming we solve the rest of the issues, because this only matters. The point of all of this discussion is if we figure out a way for the port to be a viable ongoing concern, but we need some resources, one, to get us through the hump, or we need to be able to make some improvements, then the property transaction is a way to accomplish that. The property transaction itself is not the goal or an outcome to get to. I mean, there's no point in selling the property just to do what we're doing right now for an extra year or two or three or four. I mean, that's stupid, because we only can do this once. So I mean, it's an important topic tonight. That's why that we have this specific topic, but it only fits as the smallest piece in the overall solution. But I think the strategy that you've outlined makes sense in terms of getting us to the point where we would know, what the appetite might be in the private market, or whether there isn't one before 2015, in which case we don't. I mean, given these conditions, then we have to. We don't have this as a tool in our box.
Chris?
Yeah, and I guess you brought up some of the issues I wanted to bring up, which was mainly that as this plan comes back, it is in the context of something larger we're trying to achieve. But it is important that as part of the master plan, there be some, I don't say it's an implementation plan because we're not sure how we'll move forward, but there are certainly areas that we'll have to, and you address some critical paths and some hurdles we'll have to address. And I think part of our discussion around that, or our decision making around that, is the degree of those and who will take that on, whether it's a city-port relationship or a third party. Commissioner Malden brought up one, which is around the governance issues, which is a huge one. But again, we need to start identifying those and seeing if that will help the overall plan kind of move forward. So I know there's plenty of others, and you identified. This is great, by the way, taking inventory and being able to see kind of what was contemplated years ago, and then where we are today. But I got the sense that there's a timeline on this now because of the duration of the vesting that we have is coming up relatively shortly. So we sort of need to identify these things really quickly. So we know what other additional steps we might take to kind of get to a point where we can move forward on it. And if we can, then there's a question of if we can in the context of what the mayor just laid out. So, but thank you. This is, I think, a good assessment of where we are with these properties. So.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, just real quickly. So Charlene, the 34 million for the tentative map cost going forward, assuming we were to build it out, but are there other costs associated with the infrastructure that we've already put in? Because we tend to bond a lot of that. I know that a lot of that was needed for the development further south. So are there, I would imagine there are other costs associated, I mean, that are going to be borne by the port and Seaway for the work that's been done to date, right?
Yes, in the financing agreement, there are some provisions for reimbursement to Southport Industrial Park for some of the infrastructure that has been put in place already. And financing, we're still working on that to solidify those numbers. So that's something that will be coming back to you.
So it'll come back, okay.
But yeah, there is some reimbursement. You're correct.
Any other questions? Then thank you very much.
All right, as we're waiting for that to come back up, I'll just comment that on the issue of the governance agreement, we actually had the same sort of staff level discussion about some of the relevance of the real estate terms, and that applies both to Seaway and the North Terminal. So we'll definitely take the suggestions we heard tonight and analyze what parts of the governance agreement are still potentially relevant and which ones would not be at this point. So now we're going to move into a discussion of the operating models, and it's directly related to the discussion we just had regarding real estate. But first, I'm going to briefly step through, and these are more described in your staff report, the actual models we're looking at. First one is status quo. We've pretty much put that one in front of you with the budget discussion, and you see that it's not sustainable. It was modeled after expanding bulk cargo and attracting more cargo, and that just proven to be too costly for the port, and we have a structural deficit. So that leads to number two. Anytime you have a structural deficit, the first thing any business or any entity would do is look internally to see what cost savings measures can be achieved, and that's what we've been doing for the last several weeks. And so I'll just point out that on number two, we assume certain cost reductions that total upwards of about $500,000. Won't get into the detail on that just yet, but what I wanted to point out is models 3 to 5, they all assume the same cost reductions from number two. And that's where we're going to be focusing on the discussion for this presentation. Number 3 is it contemplates a modification of the existing SSA agreement, basically to shift additional costs to SSA for the port operations, but in doing so, shift other revenue, more cargo revenue to SSA. The idea behind this is it gets the port's cargo operation to a more sustainable, feasible situation, so that we can make the most of our real estate revenue, real estate assets, and the cargo operation doesn't continue to be a net loss to the port. The same goal is attempted to be achieved under models 4 and 5. 4 would be a master lease of the entire North Terminal facility to a master leasee for a negotiated payment. And then number 5 is a model that would look at individual facilities, and I'll show you in a minute what we mean by that, but leasing individual facilities as opposed to the entire facility. We're also looking at, the matter of last resort, the port closure, what that means, what it would mean to suspend North Terminal cargo operations, both from a financial perspective but also from a community impact, and everything that would go into that. It's a difficult analysis to do, obviously, because we have to look at all the existing agreements, but we are looking at that as a potential model as well. And the general principles behind models 3 to 5, the ones that attempt to make cargo a feasible operation and expand on the real estate revenue, were first, like I said, reducing costs and shifting cost responsibilities. We are hoping to enable a lot of flexibility in this process because, as we outlined in the staff report, it's very likely as we go through the process of what we're recommending, negotiating with SSA, doing this RFI, RFP process, that we might not get the preferred result out of the process, and we need to be able to be flexible to move on to the next preferred approach. And then overall, the strategy is to, in the early years, reduce the port's debt, because that's a big burden right now on the budget, stabilize revenue, and that can be achieved through the approach that I mentioned of trying to get cargo at a sustainable level and expanding real estate. And that's what the last point, creating new productive assets, is all about. As you saw earlier, in addition to Seaway, the port has other assets that currently aren't producing. They have potential, but they're not, for whatever reason, not producing any revenue right now. So what can we do to better position those assets to start producing? So first, on the master lease, I wanted to sort of graphically outline what we would mean and what the model could potentially look like if we went with this approach. So the main lease area would be your cargo facilities. You're talking about the main cargo area, the bulk rice facility, the bulk grain facility, and the bulk area. The master lease would pay a negotiated amount and get exclusive rights to use all of those cargo facilities and enjoy all the upside, all the cargo revenue, but in doing so, take on all the operating costs and, frankly, the operating risks of being in the cargo business. The red properties that just came up are again the existing leases that we have. Those would be potentially subject to negotiation. We could, in one scenario, turn over the real estate revenue generated from the North Terminal to the master leasee if it makes the deal more attractive to a potential leasee, in addition to just the cargo revenue. And then you have the development sites, the ones that are not currently, they're vacant. They have potential for project development, whether it be through a lease or a development project, and for that matter, whether it be for a maritime operation or a non-maritime operation. There's a lot of potential for each of those properties. The port would be in the best position to try to maintain or retain those assets for their potential long-term upside, but a master leasee may be interested in taking those on as part of their long-term business model. And then you have the other revenue sources, the three off-site sources that I wanted to point out. The reason these are most relevant is because between the three, Agrium, Cimex, and the rail facilities, they generate about $677,000. What that means is it's about 56% of your real estate revenue now and about 25% of your revenue overall. So obviously those have very low operations costs associated with them, good net revenue. So likely something that the port would like to try to retain under a master lease agreement. And so this is just purely illustrative. One scenario might be to draw the line somewhere like that under this model. And we are analyzing building cash flow models for each of these different options and figuring out what it would mean to carve out this property or that property. So we'll be able to have a good way of comparing proposals once we get them.
Is it fair to say that the more we carve out, the less attractive it is to a master
Yes,
lessee?
I think.
And so you're trying to figure how you can narrow this down in some way to get the best of both worlds.
Right. The challenge.
The goal behind considering a master lease of some kind is to essentially shift the risk of costs to the lessee, but in turn you shift the lion's share, the most of it. We could probably get a fee or some kind, or either a percentage or a fee of revenues capped in some fashion, but if there is benefit, the significant portion goes to the lessee.
Right. The challenge is finding that point where we maintain enough long-term upside, which is in our estimation, it's in our real estate assets, but the leasee gets enough revenue now and enough revenue potential from the assets that they get to make it worthwhile for them. So it's finding that.
How is the lessee not plagued with the same challenge we have about revenue versus cost?
What we're looking at is a private entity may have ways to be more efficient, to be more aggressive in targeting additional cargo, have more capabilities to do that, more business development expertise, existing relationships they may be able to bring to the table to generate more revenue. Particularly with the real estate sites, there could be a leasee who has a specialty in real estate development and could see some long-term benefit in having that ability to bring tenants into the port that would generate cargo, generate more money for them. It really just, it puts it in a private model that it just expands the opportunity for potential revenue and efficiencies that reduce costs.
Are there some other examples of ports that are even remotely similar to us that are doing this?
Yeah, and what we're looking at is, are there good examples of that? There aren't any that are, just jump off the page, but we do have the consultant that's working with us, and he's indicated at least that the more common model is number 5, where you have leases of multiple facilities. There are some ports that operate like number 4, and we will try to show those as case studies so we can give you some real world examples as we go through the business plan. But I can't, off the top of my head, give you one right now. So.
You're not making a recommendation tonight.
No, and we're not making a recommendation. We'll make that really clear. Yeah.
Thank you.
But the other potential advantage, and to me probably the most significant one of a master lessee, is the potential access to capital that we don't have.
Right.
So if our theory is that if you just made the following improvements or the following changes, that we could have a thriving port. If we come to that conclusion as the port district, we have no ability to make any of that happen because we don't have any cash, we have no capital, and we're already leveraged to a point we can't raise much. And so potentially, if you had a lessee that could see the same investment economics, but have the ability not be burdened with the same bond debt that we have, and be able to draw from other capital sources, that to me is probably the best alternative. If there's actually if we could identify a strong market for the port, if we were to make a set of capital improvements, that a third party would have the ability to finance those in a way that we don't.
Right, and that's probably the most important point of the ones that I listed, is the access to capital and making that initial investment in the port to make the assets right now that aren't producing, bring them up to a point where they can on the market. And you could throw channel deeping into that category as well. If someone had the capital to do that, it would open up a lot more cargo potential. So.
Yeah, I had a similar comment on your operating model principles are basically cost reduction, cost mitigation, cost responsibility, but probably another two categories would be, for example, access to capital. So as we go through and look at if we're splitting this up or keeping it together, who are the groups that are going to be coming in, and realistically what type of access to capital they have. So as we go through and look at qualifying some of these groups that may be interested in this. And the second is that whole incentive piece. It's not necessarily the cost reduction, but it's who really has a dog in the fight to be able to want to go out and improve new markets for what we're doing. But one comment I had, when you're starting to section up these different parcels, you may have a situation where you have two groups that really kind of a little bit different business model. They're looking at a little bit different thing in terms of what they're trying to do. For example, if you have a group that wants to take over the docks, and you have another group that takes over another section, well, there's really kind of not a symmetry potentially between them in terms of what they want to do in developing their property. Whereas if you have a single group, you would think that there'd be more synergy between them, or synchronization of their business goals.
Right.
So I don't know if it would be a disadvantage of breaking this up.
Yeah, and actually that's a point that we're going to be looking at as we try to construct the evaluation process for the RFP. Once we get to an RFP, if that's the direction we go, it will be that exact point. If you're looking at a master leasee, what are they bringing in terms of cargo clients right away? That obviously is more attractive if we know up front that they have some potential clients, and you have that synergy that you can see right off the bat, and the capital investment right up front also.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
One of the questions I have about even if we're considering the master lease or the multiple lease model, I'm glad you're going to go out and try to get some case studies of those ports that are in that model that maybe have the master lease versus the multiple lease. One of the things I would be interested in seeing, and it's not just is it, I'm going to assume they're going to come in with capital to bear and providing a lot of the expertise you're speaking of. But what I would also be interested, if it's accessible, is sort of what were the terms associated with those relationships they built with the port or the owners of the port or the districts they're in, because that would be equally important to know what we're going to having our eyes wide open to what we're approaching about any relationship or agreements they have with the city or the port districts or whatever they're in, because that is an important part of how we go forward. I think Mr. Johannessen's comments allude to that you want to make sure that any multiple lease or larger lease are sort of on the same page as you. And so having, I don't know if there's a market for our port for a master lease operator at this point. But I'd be interested in kind of understanding kind of what that relationship is and what legal requirements or what other financial requirements are given to that.
We'll look at that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and then on Model 5, this is just to illustrate the facilities that could be potentially carved out, and it's a little hard to see on this map, but again, we're talking about the bulk rice facility, the bulk grain facility, the bulk cargo facility, and then the main terminal. And then you could have a leasee interested in one or more of the development sites to actually come in and build a project. So that would be part of the process for this RFI, RFP. The idea is that we would allow enough flexibility in that process to permit either master lease proposals or individual lease facilities to come in with a response. And at that point, we'd be able to evaluate the different models as a whole with multiple tenants or master lease proposals against one another to determine what the optimal long-term model would be. So this just outlines the next steps that we'll be undertaking over the next month or so. First thing is we're doing a financial analysis of the potential models, comparing them to one another, not just in the short term, but going out quite a few years to see what the potential benefits and risks are 10 years out from now. And also within that, it kind of alludes to Commissioner Ledesma's point about community impact and the relationship with the city. We want to make sure that the models are evaluated not just for the impact on the port, but also what the potential long-term benefit or impacts would be to the city as a whole. The next step would be to prepare a request for interest, and that would be to get to the implementation of Model 4 and 5. The idea here is that we would come back on January 23rd and give you a little bit more information about what we plan to put in that RFI and potentially ask for authorization to issue that. And again, that's not a point of a decision. It's giving us the flexibility early on that we need to go out to the private market, gauge the interest, get feedback, try to start seeing if the private market can put together relationships in advance of responding to an RFP. And then finally in February, we're looking at potentially the February 20th meeting to actually present the business plan for consideration. And at this point, the business plan, we've really, over the last few months here, been giving you parts of the picture in these workshops. And hopefully at this point, the business plan can be boiled down into a set of recommendations and actions that would be necessary to implement the preferred operating model going forward. So that concludes staff's presentation. If you have any questions at this point, we can take those. And I think it's probably too late for our consultant, but
I think he just left.
yeah. So thank you.
All right, any questions of the commission yet? All right, we have, I think we're going to go to public now. So I've got about 36 minutes worth of public comment. If you all take your 3 minutes, so we'll try to move it right along. You don't need the whole time. We appreciate that, but you have a 3-minute limit here. And I've got, just take them in order, I've got Don Van Dorian. Is Don here? Don or Dan? I'm sorry. You passed for now? Okay. We got Jeff, is it Lapper? Loper, sorry, Jeff, couldn't read right. Okay. Okay. Who would you recommend that I call next, sir? Come on up. How about Derek Peterson?
Derek Peterson, President Local 18. I just want to say wow. Started off with a couple questions, probably got about 80 now. You guys got definitely a deck in front of you. It really scares me, a lot of this stuff. $30 million to develop, we can't even come up with money to dredge. I saw your face, Christopher, you about fell out of your chair. We aren't going forward, I feel. Governance change again. We're no different than when it was the Yolo Sacramento Port District, it seems like. I see a lot of land up there for sale. 2 years now we got to sell. I hope what you say could happen and we buy more time. Everybody keeps asking, how do we bring cargo in? Well, Seems like we need a full stevedore company, baby, that does cargo. Nothing against the staff that we have, but if we aren't in stevedoring, maybe we don't have the answers. A lot of faces up there. Mike's been around forever. You guys have been around a long time. But you guys are also city councilmen, right? Other than Mike. So everything that gets brought here, you guys already know about. The city knows everything because you guys are the city. We act like we got to do certain things, but we spent a lot of time on sell. The smallest point you guys said is selling land. We spent more time on that than we spend on how do we run the port, what changes. I personally am getting frustrated because I have a job out there. I don't want to move. I love West Sac, born and raised here. I know you guys are trying your hardest, and it'd be rude of me to sit there and say try harder. But something has to really change, and hiring people that don't have any history on the waterfront to run a port just personally doesn't seem like it's the right way. If we have companies or individuals that are interested in running our port, it seems like that's the best way to help ourselves. I think we really need to start putting concerns into that, because to be asked a 3-month window to come up with a plan to make this place viable, and the place has been around since '63. Now all of a sudden we want to do it in 3 months. We couldn't do it since '63. That's a tall order to put on anybody that you hire. So I think we need to eliminate these problems and really, really look at stevedore-based companies. If you guys are going to do an analysis towards other ports, I ask this. Let's be fair to the Port of Sacramento. Do an analysis against a port that is like ours. Same acreage. I know everybody's tired of hearing rough and ready. I'm sick of rough and ready. Don't judge this port against rough and ready. We lose. We have 5 buildings. What are you guys going to do? Lend out 14 square feet of each building to 100 tenants? We'll never be that big. So when the analysis comes back, hey, let's have open space. Let's have grain facilities. Let's have equal acreage usable instead of stacking us against a place that has 1,000 square acres. It's going to make us look like idiots. We can't compete against that. So let's have fair analysis and let's do this right. Because like you guys said, I agree with you. We're out of time. So good luck on everything. And I know Local 18 has been there since day one to help. We're still there to help. We may not all believe in the same direction we're going, but I think the bottom line is we want this port to succeed.
Thanks, Derek. I appreciate that very much. Tim Campbell, did you want to weigh in? I got Campbell Senior and Junior, it looks like. Both.
Which do you got? Okay,
Go ahead.
I'll go Junior. Good evening, Mr. Chair, guys. We have the most successful stevedoring company in our port. The union backs them 100%. We stand behind SSA on this. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I have other cards. I'm happy to call them all, but is there anyone else that put a card in that wishes to get up and speak? Because you're more than welcome to. I know some of you passed on this. Your president has spoken. Sir, do you have something you want to say? Come on. All right. All right, I don't have anybody else then wishing to speak that I have a card for, so, but thank you. And I quite frankly, Derek and Tim say it all, and we are all concerned about this, very much so. And yeah, it's a balance between going too fast and not doing this quick enough, and you know, coming up with the right money and the right combination of the right people, and you know, I'm one that doesn't want to see radical changes on the port because I got pretty used to it the way it is, but we're losing money or we're not making enough money, so there are things we have to do. And I think from what I'm seeing, at least it's the homeboys that are trying to figure it out, not somebody from across the river. And so all we can do is to keep trying to work with each other to make this thing happen, and we're doing the best we can. And we have some very smart people here. I want to acknowledge the staff that's worked on this. Dedicated, intelligent, and I think are trying to give us a fair and unbiased assessment of where we are, and then we're going to try to figure out where to go from there. So thank you all for those comments. Mr. Mayor, do you have something else? Leaning forward there. Anyone else? No. All right, that's all I have on that item. Oscar, yes?
Yeah, just share a quick thought. I know it's easy to overlook, but I know that a lot of the folks that are out here are concerned for good reason. I mean, it's where you work and it's where you want to continue to work, and it's not being overlooked. Although we don't talk about it, we're trying to stay focused on kind of how to put together a business plan. But I know I speak for the rest of the commission that it is important, and we are taking it very seriously, and we are putting the best folks that we have on it to make sure that we develop the best product that we can so that the port is sustainable. So with respect to, Mr. Peterson's comment about it's not that much different than the previous commission, I can promise you it's absolutely different. I know your intent was to not, point that out, but the fact of the matter is this commission is absolutely 100% committed to making sure that we get the best product that's sustainable in our community, that preserves the jobs that you all have. And that's very important. So although we don't talk about that, that is a component that factors into a lot of what we're trying to do. But it's got to work. It's got to make sense. It's got to make sense for us financially.
All right.
Yeah, I did want to say
sir.
something. So I certainly agree with Commissioner Villegas, and I was on that commission before when we went through this. And just the level of analysis and thought about this is, and Chairman McGowan was there as well. I mean, there was as much conversation then about what was on TV the prior week, because folks were just so distant from it. It was just, the port was an abstract concept on the other side of the river, and we know, because so many of the folks that work either at the port or at businesses that are associated with the port are right here in our community, and so it's a much more real, and because it's become such an integral part of the city, it has changed that conversation. You've mostly scoped the operating models in kind of organizational, structural terms. The question that I want to make sure you're paying attention to as you're doing the analysis and the preparation for the business plan is on the number 3, the SSA agreement modification. Because what I struggle with, just conceptually, and we didn't address this tonight, but it feels like that is the model that we did before, turned from a 6 on the dial to an 8 on the dial, and I'll be very blunt, it didn't perform. Right? It did not result. It's not as though we got a whole lot of business that, we turned away, or in fact, none. Actually, we were turning away more business before the city took over because of all the battling that was going on. And I don't need to answer this tonight, Aaron. I'm just saying, as you're scoping it out, one of the considerations is you're going to need to be able to explain if model number 3 is the one that emerges, why sort of diving in even further into an approach which was sort of SSA taking over. Which is what we did the first round. SSA, we're going to contract with you to be our operator. Let's do that. Let's take that, but just turn the dial up more. Why we should expect that to produce radically, because that's what we need, radically better results than it's not like it produced really strong results and we want to turn those up further. It didn't really produce. And it's not a hit on SSA. It's just that model, for whatever reason, wasn't effective. And so for me at least, you're going to have to be really clear about what's fundamentally different, because a hope and a prayer won't work, and we actually have experience with at least with that in a flavor. And so as you're thinking, as you're scoping what option 3 might look like, answering that question to me is really critical.
Yeah, and it would be a vastly different model than what we have. That's the idea. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And if I may ask another request as well, because I know part of your analysis we brought up earlier would include looking at cash flow projections under each scenario. So I may be the only one up here interested in kind of seeing those laid out, but I would, because I think, I want to echo some of what Commissioner Villegas and Cabaldon brought up, was just that this is a good analysis, and this is, I appreciate the scope and the work and the depth that you're providing us in looking at the entire enterprise that is the port as we see it and what its potential is. But we all know that the decision we made on this going forward model and which one could pencil out. So I am interested in seeing, and that's just me showing up at the office late in the afternoon a couple weeks from now, and also just kind of understanding the assumptions we're using based on what Commissioner Cabaldon just brought up, which is understanding if we are anticipating increases to revenue because we're going with this model or these multiple lease agreements or a master lease agreement. I just want to understand what those assumptions are and what they're based on. And I think that's the only way we're going to kind of, I appreciate really the exercise we're going through, because this is how a business plan should work. But that's the honesty and the need that we have to have real-based, factual-based projections that we can all believe in and say this is what is going to turn it. So I'm just volunteering myself, not that but it is the level we need to get to.
Well, as chair, I just appointed Mr. Ledesma as a committee of one to go over that stuff with you and take the full responsibility on behalf of the commission and make sure he understands it in a way that we don't screw it up. Thanks. I want you to have all the information you need to help me make a good decision. Thanks a lot, Aaron. You got what you need?
Yeah, thank you.
I think we're done with that item, except to say I want to thank everybody for coming out on this. And I had like 12 cards, and candidly, I think they were all from members of ILWU, and we do appreciate you being here. I do appreciate your interest. You're welcome anytime. We'd like to see your face. I'll give you a personal. I shouldn't admit this because you'll probably use it against me, but this is weighing. Like Oscar said it the best, but I do want to amplify it. This is weighing on all of us. I mean, I can't go to the market without running into one of you guys, and you may not agree with what we do, but I want you to believe in your heart that we're doing the best we could do, and if you were in our places, you would feel like you did the best you could do. Hopefully, we do agree. I'm not saying we're not going to agree because I don't know where we're going to land on this thing. The last thing I want to do is be going down the aisle at Rayleigh's and seeing one of you guys at the other end and ducking the other aisle. And that's sort of my litmus test. If I could look you in the eye and say I did the damn best I could on this thing to keep you working and keep the port open, then I feel okay. So it is important, and it's real for us. And to that extent, there is this workshop, community workshop on the 22nd. I invite you to show up and be prepared to express your views and your comments and your criticisms and your compliments and your ideas. Anything you got, we need to hear about them then. There'll be more of this conversation then. All right, well, go on. I think with the other items we had, is there anything on the general administration, Mike or Marty, that we need to bring up?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we do have additional copies of the flyer for the community forum on the 22nd on the table there for folks. And then next week, Mayor Baldwin will be at the U.S. Mayor's Conference. Mike Lucan and I will join him for part of the time to lobby on the issue of O&M dredging for the port and other issues as it relates to our business plan.
Good. Well, I've been privy to some of those meetings, and I know that the city. I'm very impressed with the work that the city does in its lobbying efforts. We don't always bring home the trophy, but we go back there prepared to hunt, and sometimes we get one, sometimes we don't. But the city does a good job back there, so I'm glad to see you're going back, Mr. Mayor. All right, if there's nothing further, then the Port Commission's adjourned. Thank you all.